Every letter has a backstory, some situation in life, some occasion that generates the letter. Sometimes the letter itself reveals the backstory. However, most of the time it doesn't, the writer assuming you already know the backstory and therefore having no need to rehearse it in the letter itself. However, in the case of ancient letters, such as the letters of Paul, we are so far removed from that backstory that we are left to speculate on what it might have been from clues within the letter itself. Now, we're helped in that by the fact that the early church's historian, Luke, chronicled Paul's ministry in his sequel to the third gospel, which he titled the Acts of the Apostles. Consequently, we can do a close reading both of Paul's letters and Luke's Acts of the Apostles, and sometimes we can reconstruct that backstory. Philippians is a case in point. On the surface, it appears to be a friendly little thank you note penned by Paul to the Philippians in gratitude for a love gift that they sent him while he was in prison. But if you move deeper into the letter, there is an awful lot of conflict and confrontation in this friendly little thank you note. Something's going on here, something not quite right, something in the backstory that isn't explained by the notion, often repeated in the commentaries, that Philippians is the most affectionate of all of Paul's letters. Let me explain. And so let's explore Paul's letter to the Philippians. There has developed around this letter a scholarly consensus. Philippians, most scholars would say, is a love fest between this congregation and the missionary who founded the church. Ostensibly, the purpose of the letter is that it is a thank you note for the gift that they had sent to him while he is in prison. Where he's in prison, we don't know. The possibilities are Caesarea, Rome, and Ephesus, with Ephesus perhaps being the most likely. The letter reflects a level of intimacy and gratitude, unlike anything one reads in any of Paul's letters. All you have to do is read Philippians 1, 3 through 11, Paul's prayer for the Philippians. Paul usually begins each letter with a prayer for the congregation. Well, this prayer is particularly intimate and indeed even touching. And the key word in the letter to the Philippians is rejoice, kero in the Greek. That word, rejoice, is used in Philippians more than in any other Pauline letter. And so what about the occasion, then, of the letter to the Philippians? Well, there are some personal issues that occasion this letter. The church sent a gift to Paul in prison by one of their members, whose name was Epaphroditus. Chapter 4, Paul talks about the fact that Epaphroditus brought a gift from the congregation to him. But while Epaphroditus was with Paul, he fell ill. And so in this section, chapter 4, Paul pleads for the Philippians to welcome Epaphroditus back. Now that's strange. That's curious. Why would he have to do that? Why would he have to plead with the Philippians to welcome their messenger back who came to him with a love gift? It is a thank you note. But if it's a thank you note, it's a rather odd one. In chapter 3, for example, Paul begins chapter 3 by saying, watch out for the dogs, look out for the evildoers, watch out for those who mutilate the flesh. Now, if it's a thank you note, it's a rather strange way to conclude a thank you note. Why does he do that? And then the letter was occasioned by Paul's desire to share with them information about his situation. He's in prison, and he wants to let them know, because they've given him a gift, that he's okay and things are okay with him where he is. But Paul actually says in chapter 1, verses 15 and following, that there are some in the church who hope to afflict me in my bonds. That is, there are some who hope to exploit the situation and to create hardship and difficulty for Paul while he's in prison. Now again, that's strange. Why would some in the church want to do that if they've sent him a love gift? Then there are some pastoral issues as well. As I've already indicated, there seems to be some opposition from outside the church. Watch out for the dogs. Watch out for those who mutilate the flesh. Some would suggest these are Judaizers, similar to those who caused all the problems in the churches of Galatia. Then there are some internal disputes as well. Two women called by name, Euodia and Syntyche. Paul calls them out because they are apparently having a pretty serious conflict with each other right in the church. And Paul calls them out and asks for someone in the church to intervene and mediate this dispute. And so I guess I would summarize by saying, if this is a thank you note to a church with which Paul has had a love fest, it's a rather strange one. And so let's look at the backstory of Philippians. There's always a backstory in these letters. Letters don't just come de novo from nowhere. There's a backstory. In this particular letter, some in the church are apparently embarrassed by the fact that Paul is in prison. Keep in mind that Philippi was a Roman colony, the leading Roman colony, and many members of the church, even though they were Christians, were loyal Roman subjects. And so the fact that Paul was arrested and imprisoned as a troublemaker was no doubt something of an embarrassment to them. And so Paul alludes to that and says, there are some who hope to afflict me by my imprisonment. Logically, therefore, not everybody in the church favored the gift to Paul. And so it raises the question, why did they send the gift? Well, if you understand anything about congregational dynamics, they sent the gift because the person who gave most of the money in the gift favored the gift. This was the largest, wealthiest benefactor in the church. This person bankrolled the church by and large. And if this person favored the gift to Paul, the rest reluctantly went along. That person was Lydia. If you look at Acts chapter 16, let me read what Luke says in verses 11 through 15. Setting sail, therefore, from Troas, we made a direct voyage to Samothrace, and the following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is the leading city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in this city some days, and on the Sabbath we went outside the gate to the river, where we supposed there was a place of prayer. We sat down and spoke to the women who had come together. One who heard us was a woman named Lydia from the city of Thyatira, a seller of purple goods, a God-fearer. The Lord opened her heart to give heed to what was said by Paul. And when she was baptized, together with her household, she besought us, saying, if you have judged me to be faithful in the Lord, come to my house and stay. And then Luke adds, and she prevailed upon us. Now this passage is interesting for several reasons. First of all, Paul, as was his custom, goes to the synagogue to start his congregation, his church. But apparently there is no synagogue in this town, and so he goes, it is a Roman colony, remember, and probably a very Gentile city. So he goes to the riverside because he's heard at the riverside there is a prosekin, that is a prayer place. And so he goes there expecting to find Jews because he knows that he'll have a receptive audience among Jews. They already understand the Torah, they understand the one true God, they understand the scripture. But when he gets there, there are no men. Well, where are all the Jewish men? Well, they've got their shops open, even though it's the Sabbath day. This is a very pagan Gentile city, and these Jews have learned to adapt, and they've become acculturated. But there are women who go there. And so Paul sits down and talks to the women who are there. One of them is Lydia. She's from the city of Thyatira. Well, Thyatira, in the Greek, was actually a city in the kingdom of Sardis. Sardis, rather, was the capital of the kingdom known as Lydia. Croesus was the king of Sardis, the king of Lydia. And so in actuality, her name was not Lydia, that was her nickname. It would be like you or I moving to France, and if someone didn't know our name, they would say, well, He's the American. Well, she was the Lydian. She's a seller of purple goods. That's a very expensive commodity in the ancient world. Purple dye was made by harvesting a very rare shellfish in the Mediterranean, and it took a lot of economy and overhead to carry that kind of good in the ancient world. And so Lydia was obviously a woman of some means if she sold purple goods. She was also probably single. If the Bible tells you anything about a woman, it will tell you who her husband is. And the fact that it does not say she had a husband, probably indicates that she was single. And she opened her heart and gave heed to Paul and was baptized with her house. That means she has servants. Another indication that she's probably very wealthy. And then she constrains Paul and his group, come stay in my house. The word in the Greek is parabiadzome. That's a very strong word in the Greek. Which means she compelled us. She constrained us. Lydia is a very powerful woman, and she's not accustomed to being told no. And so in all likelihood, the church in Philippi started in Lydia's home, according to Luke in Acts chapter 16. And so what I'm suggesting is that Lydia, being a benefactor of Paul and a supporter of Paul, wanted this gift to go to Paul. And so when she said, I think we ought to send the gift to Paul, irrespective of the fact that some don't like the fact that he's in prison, the rest of the church reluctantly went along because she gave most of the money. But when Epaphroditus took the money to Paul and then got sick, nearly died, no doubt some in the church said, see, we told you so. We never should have sent that money to that jailbird. And so Paul then has to plead to the congregation to welcome Epaphroditus back. Paul tiptoes around the fact that Lydia is his benefactor. He never mentions her by name in the letter to the Philippians, which is odd because Luke tells us that the church was probably organized, founded in her home. Why wouldn't he mention her in the letter? Well, he doesn't mention her because she gave most of the money, and many of the people in the church didn't want her to send the money and didn't want to send the gift to Paul. And so he doesn't want to rub salt in the wound by calling attention to the fact that she was the primary benefactor. He doesn't want to exacerbate the situation, and so he doesn't mention her. But he uses code language. In chapter 4 of Philippians, Paul will use technical business language that a businesswoman like Lydia would understand. Profit, loss, assets, liability, paid in full. He uses language like that in chapter 4 and in no other letter he has written. Isn't that amazing? All the scholars note that. Why does Paul suddenly shift to business language in Philippians and he never uses that language in any other letter? Well, I think he's using it because he's trying to signal Lydia, I know you're out there and I'm grateful for your support. Moreover, Paul is deferential to the male church leaders. This is the only letter where Paul singles out the male church leaders by name. He calls out the bishops and the deacons. Why would he do that? Because their egos are already bruised by the fact that Lydia overrode their objections and sent the gift to Paul in prison. And I think Paul alludes to Lydia in chapter 4, verse 3. I told you there was a dispute between two women in the church, Euodia and Syntyche. Paul in chapter 4 says, I plead with you, true yoke fellow, Eunesi siye. Paul is saying to this person, intervene and settle this dispute. Though the term he uses is masculine, I don't think he's referring to a man. I don't think he's referring to the deacons or the elders or the bishops in the church. I think he's referring to a woman. I think he's referring to Lydia. Because Lydia is the leading woman in the church, a powerful woman in the church. And quite frankly, Paul is much too smart to ask a man to settle a dispute between two women. And so, as we look at this picture of the stained glass windows depicting Paul and Lydia in the little chapel of St. Lydia, there by the baptismal site, by the river in ancient Philippi, where Paul baptized Lydia and started the church there, we are left with these questions. Of course, I can prove none of this. But it nonetheless does make sense. of the text of Philippians as we have it. And it explains some of the things scholars have noted through the years but don't know how to make sense of, like Paul's technical business language in this letter and his impassioned appeal to take Epaphroditus back, even though Epaphroditus is one of their members. And so while I can prove none of this, that's my thinking on the occasion and purpose of Philippians, and you have to admit, it is an intriguing possibility, isn't it? Till next time, take care. God bless.